In professional writing this week, we return to a basic concerning grammar, the use of punctuation, particularly here the use of comma, which is essential in clear professional communication. So commas themselves are essential to meaning, and if you don't believe that, compare the two sentences here, where one has a comma and one does not. The sentences seem simple, right? Let's eat, Grandma, with a comma in it, versus let's eat, Grandma. In the first sentence, you're addressing Grandma, asking her to eat, and in the second, you are actually eating Grandma. So the comma here is absolutely essential to meaning. Which of these two sentences says what do you intend? It all depends upon the comma in the end. So I want to look at just a few examples of the use of commas in particular sentences, and then you'll work through an exercise that asks you to edit a piece and include commas within it for a clearer meaning. The first is commas can separate basic items in a series. If you have a list of things, commas are used in the sentence. For example, here we have a sentence: I looked for a new laptop at the Apple Store, Best Buy, and the IUN bookstore. The commas here make it clear for the reader what is included within the series itself. You can use that comma before and or not. Both are correct. In this case, I've included it and used it within the edited sentence. The bottom sentence here is a little bit more complicated without the commas. So just read through the unedited sentence here. The challenges of the wired classroom include constant distraction, teachers' uncertainties, and tapping into students' already significant capacities within the web. Note that the commas here make that series of challenges much clearer for the reader and are essential to understanding the sentence. Commas can also be used to set off interjections, to show direct address, and to highlight contrasting elements. So you take this interjection here. Oh, I thought the assignment was due next week. The O, is set off by a comma to show that it's an expression of surprise. In the second, you have direct address used, so you want to be clear who you're addressing. So the comma sets off that addressee, Mr. Jobs. Do you have a job for me? In the final one, the commas are used to set off a contrast. Google, not Apple, is the most highly valued company at present. So the commas are used to set up the distinction between companies in this particular sentence. Commas can also be used within a piece of writing to set off a place name or date. For instance, here you have the university's address is 3400 South Broadway, Gary, Indiana. You always include that comma between the city and state. In a series like this, you want to include the commas to also set off the street address. Similarly, you use commas to set off dates in particular. So in the edited version of the bottom sentence, Steve Jobs introduced the original Macintosh computer on January 24th, 1984, 8 years after the company had developed its first model. The commas set off and clarify the date within the writing itself. If you're using direct quotation, commas are used to clarify the mood between the speaker and the quotation itself, and are utilized with quotation marks. So, for instance, this second sentence here, John Smith writes, and then you have the direct quotation. Steve Jobs introduced the original Macintosh computer in early 1984. You can also use indirect quotation within a sentence where you use the word that, and then you don't have any comma that's necessary if you're not directly quoting the source here. John Smith writes that the Macintosh computer had its origins in 1984. And of course there you want to be sure to include source usage and citation if you are indirectly quoting and you don't want to plagiarize through the use of indirect quotation. Commas are also used to set off additional information. You have the first sentence here, which is a comma splice, a series of sentences that are just simply linked by commas, and those need to be edited and fixed to make them complete, clear sentences. The Macintosh is now known as the Mac. It was the first desktop computer and featured an integral graphical user interface mouse and ready setup. You want to clarify that for the reader, so you see the use of added information included in the edited sentence that's at the top. The Macintosh, now known as the Mac, was the first desktop computer featuring an integral graphical user interface, comma, mouse, and ready setup. So the commas are used to set off the list here, but also to highlight additional information. Another example is at the bottom. Steve Jobs led Apple for over a decade. He died in 2011. You can use the clause here to highlight who Steve Jobs was. Steve Jobs, comma, who led Apple for over a decade, comma, died in 2011. So added information is set off by commas within a sentence. And then you can also use commas to set off introductory words in a sentence that could be additional information. For instance, here you have the opening sentence, labeled by Sherry Turkle as the modern alchemy multitasking defines our working lives. It invites constant distraction. So you have a comma splice here and kind of a run-on pattern in the sentence. So you want to set up Turkle's words as additional information. And here we've used a semicolon to break up the comma splice. Labeled by Sherry Turkle as the modern alchemy, multitasking defines our working lives. It invites constant distraction. So you could split this into two separate sentences, instead of using the semicolon here. But that first comma is absolutely essential to understanding the sentence. The modern alchemy taught multitasking is not one phrase, right? It is the modern alchemy, which is multitasking. So the comma is necessary to understanding. And another example here is the bottom sentence. Contrary to many opinions, comma, texting improves literacy. So the introductory phrase, contrary to many opinions, is set off by commas to clarify a contrast here. And finally, commas are often used with the use of subordination. The top example, the edited sentence where which breaks down a comma splice in the first sentence, I'll read the first sentence. Many texters enjoy breaking linguistic rules. They also know they need to be understood. That's a comma splice, two sentences just jammed together with a comma. To edit it and fix it, you can use subordination, as in the second sentence. Although many texters enjoy breaking linguistic rules, comma, they also know they need to be understood. Note that the comma indicates the pause there between the introductory words, the introductory phrase at the beginning, and the actual heart of the sentence in the second half. Another example at the bottom here, the unedited version. When Steve Jobs returned to the company, Apple consolidated its multiple consumer-level desktop models into the iMac. If you fix the sentence at the bottom, when Steve Jobs cut the apostrophe S, returned to the company, comma, Apple consolidated its multiple consumer-level desktop models into the iMac. So the clause that defines the time when he returned is set off by a comma for clarity. Commas are absolutely essential to understanding clear communication in professional writing, and so review these usages of the comma and do the short assignment that will give you an opportunity to kind of rethink comma usage and how important it is to being clear in writing. Thanks.